My name is Jennifer Martin, and Scott, I know your first name, but not your last.
My name is Scott Seaton. I'm with Greenhouse
Seaton.
Specialist
Right.
Northwest.
Okay, so quick background on me is that I've been a commercial cannabis cultivator indoor in the San Francisco Bay Area dating back into the 90s. I actually lived in Amsterdam in the mid-90s and competed in the cannabis cultivation market there. And I've been developing more efficient systems for indoor cultivation in terms of yield, low labor, high quality, just trying to make it as easy as possible to bust out mass quantities of top shelf stuff. And they asked me to come in and do this talk because there's interest in the market right now towards smokable hemp. And so coming in to do this, I have a past Cannabis Cup win under my belt. I live in Hawaii now, and I mainly do facility design, operating plans, and I do a lot of R&D on lighting and nutrients. And just general cultivation methods. So like how big the plants are going to get, how many you're going to have per light. I'm also a propagation expert. I ran a facility in the Oakland area for 10 years that did 10,000 clones per month to the dispensaries there. So I have a lot of hands-on experience in medium scale indoor commercial environments. And I live in Hawaii now, which is where he's from, so we have a little kinship there. And I've worked for 4 years with one of the 8 licensees there as their cultivation advisor. And now I'm working independently with clients all over the world with operating plans and facility designs. So that's my intro, Scott.
Yeah, my name is Scott Seaton. I'm with a company called Greenhouse Specialist Northwest. It was actually founded in Hawaii with my father back in the 70s. I got involved in the 80s, about 82, 83, where I became a partner to better serve the local community horticultural industry with, say, their options that are available for growing in greenhouses, which is a really interesting thing because Hawaii is such an island. You would think everything grows. You're right, and so does mildew and bugs and insects and everything else. So yeah, you need a greenhouse. Anyway, as well as the other supply end. I was educated at the University of Hawaii Hilo through the horticultural industry. And basically, about 12 years ago, I decided to move to the mainland and come into the Willamette Valley and offer the same operations I do now in Hawaii. My sister took that over. But I've been doing this for 35 years, and basically we've seen all the different markets that open up, anywhere from anthuriums, orchids, to now cannabis and hemp. So we've followed, the industry to try to help the growers come up with the best options available to get their crop to the market as quickly as possible with the lowest COD they can. At any rate, that's pretty much me. Now up to
Cool. All right.
Jennifer.
And so just a couple of little housekeeping things before we start. I've got some business cards over there on the table, so that way if anybody just wants that after the talk and doesn't need to ask any direct questions, you can just take a shortcut and grab a business card over there. And then the other reminder is to turn your cell phone ringers off before we get going. Okay, let me start my little clock here. So the smokable hemp concept, I got to say, is fairly new to me. I was at the Vegas show a couple months ago, and I love smelling cannabis. Like when I go to any show, I'm just like smelling jar after jar after jar, and I'm trying to memorize the smell, see what they call it, and see if I can guess it the next time. And I'm really into that. I love all the various terpene profiles. And as a seller of cannabis over the years, it was obvious to me, taking the material to sell, that really the only thing they're looking for at the beginning, and besides a low price, is an amazing smell. They're not going to sit there in the dispensaries and take a puff of it every time to see if it's what they want. They're going to smell it. And the smell even beats like how chunky it is. They just want that nose. So I'm a connoisseur of those different terpene profiles. And when I was at the Vegas show a couple months ago, there was an Oregon operator there who was overseeing multiple farms. I can't remember his name, but he had the same kind of display that a cannabis dispensary would normally have, where it was like a row of 10 jars of federally compliant hemp flower. They all had very unique smells and names, and all below 0.3 THC. And so he gave me some samples, and I was very impressed by that. I personally like to get a buzz, so it wouldn't be something that I want, but I have plenty of friends who would like to smoke something and not get high. And so I started really thinking about this and thinking, okay, I get it. This is for all those people out there that love these smells, but they just want to stay on the job and not have their mind go off into, all the places that cannabis can take it. So I started doing my research on this because in Hawaii, there are only 8 vertically integrated $20 million licenses with no end in sight on that. But there are hemp licenses available. And so I'm personally looking into getting myself an indoor hemp license so that I can sell high-grade, high-terpene, stinky hemp flowers. That'd be fun for me. So the reason why I put on this slide that it's a shaky market is because the USDA is playing around with the ways that they're going to be regulating this. And one of the recent restrictions that they put on it, or I should say specifications on testing, was to test from the top 8 to 10 inches of the plant when they go out to check THC levels, which most of you know is going to be where the THC is the most potent on the plant. And as a result of that method, 45% of all of the hemp crops in the U.S. failed last year due to having excessive THC levels. So it was a bloodbath for all the people that were really going in deep. There are a lot of seed providers that are getting sued right now. I have a friend who's one of them. And he had seed that went out to a lot of different sources, and only one of the crops came up hot from the same seed source, because I don't know if they waited too long to test it or they had more sunshine in that area, but the circumstances made that particular crop higher. And so now he's got a $5 million lawsuit that he's having to defend. And I have a feeling most of the seed companies out there are shaking in their shoes pretty bad about that, because they don't know how to make sure that all the seed is going to stay compliant. And that's definitely a concern of mine as well, if I'm going to be a hemp grower. So people like smoking stuff, especially if it's not going to hurt them. I can see hemp, different flavors of hemp vapes being really popular as long as they don't have vitamin E acetate in them. But this is an indication of, do I have a pointer on here?
Yes, on the top.
Top. Right here. So 250% increase in sales for hemp flower between 2017 and 2018. I couldn't find a 2019 statistic, but up to 71 million, still kind of small in the relative scheme of things, but it's growing super fast. And it could be a trend, and that's another reason why I think this is a little bit of a shaky endeavor for anybody who's going from a farming, like a mass farming biomass situation, into a craft flower situation, because in this industry, and maybe in all industries, but this is the one that I know, people glom on, right? Like there's a new idea and suddenly there's 100 times more people doing it than the market can possibly support. And so even if it's a great idea to do smokable hemp flower right now, it might be that in another 2 years it's 10 times oversupplied and you're kind of back to the same problem that you started with. So I just wanted everybody to be aware of the risks that they're looking at when they consider going this direction. But I wanted to also point out, that smell is really what sells this stuff, and that hemp has as wide of a range of interesting flavors as cannabis does. So I think it's interesting for, let's say that you're going to get a cannabis license in a few years, but that's not happening in your state right now. You could get a hemp license and you could be growing hemp in your cannabis facility and just waiting for the approval to grow the higher THC stuff. So that's a way to start honing your craft as a high-end grower legally while you're waiting for your cannabis license to come around. Okay, so I kind of already went over this, but so what happened was in places on the East Coast, like North Carolina in particular, they tried to ban smokable flower, and then it went to a federal judge, and the judge struck it down and said, no, you can't legalize hemp, the plant, and then ban a part of it. And so, of course, they tried to do that because they don't want anybody having any fun with hemp, even though it's not fun compared to cannabis, but they were afraid that it would be fun. And so they tried to stop that. But what they have found looking into the genetics of it is that the CBG heavy varieties are the ones that are most likely to not have too much THC in them. So that's the current status. The overall current status is that the breeding has a long way to go. So when you buy seed, you're buying, the mating of a male and female from a previous generation where the breeder believes that the THC won't be over a certain level, but it could be because these lines are not stabilized yet. In a few more years, they will be. And so right now, it's real important to keep track of which hemp seed breeders are the ones that have done the back crossing and the double, triple testing to make sure that what they're selling you isn't going to be a problem. So the genetics is the part of the whole equation that still basically needs development and is in development to get you to where you can buy hemp seed confidently and not have that problem of it testing too high. This is a website I found that's selling smokable hemp, all these different flavors, for almost the same price as cannabis. So you can go onto this industrial, what's it called? industrialhempfarms.com, and you can order a gram of indoor Granddaddy purple CBD hemp flower for $7 and have it shipped to you. And they ship across state lines, and who knows how good any of it is, but this is something that you could do. You know, there's no restrictions on shipping across interstate lines. So you could have your varieties, put a website up, get it SEO'd, and be sending out little packets of hemp flower. And there it is. There are like 3 or 4 different websites doing that. These guys have about 30 different choices, and I'm sure they're not growing all their own stuff. They're just acting as a retail distributor for it. So if you have some hemp flower you want to sell, you might want to contact them and ask them if they'll buy it wholesale from you. Okay, so this is one of my favorite analogies, the property dog versus the show dog. So this property dog, everybody loves this property dog, but it scavenges, it sometimes eats its own poop, it doesn't have a lot of visits to the doctor, it never gets groomed, and it's not worth $50, that property dog. But over here, you have Fifi, who only eats the very best food, gets groomed and taken to the doctor on a regular basis, gets perfect indoor conditions for living, and this dog's probably worth at least $500. And that's the distinction you're looking for when you're trying to go from outdoor hemp biomass to indoor high-grade smokable hemp. And here's the marijuana equivalent of the outdoor dog and the indoor dog. That's what your typical hemp looks like. Even like when I've seen it in dispensaries for sale, that's kind of what it looks like. It's not well trimmed. It looks like it's aged a little bit too much. It doesn't have much of a smell. This is what high-grade cannabis looks like. And you can make the stuff on the left look like the stuff on the right by growing it in better conditions and under better circumstances. And to circle back to remind you, my expertise is in nutrient profiles, nutrient regimens, and recipes. And so I've done hundreds of tests where I take leaf tissue and apply a certain nutrient formula to those plants and then analyze that leaf tissue to see what the mineral breakdown is and then dial in the recipe to try to get the most out of the plant. And what I've observed going through facilities is that at least 95% of them need help with their nutrient regimens and have that as a limiting factor, one of the main limiting factors on why they're not getting higher performance out of their plants. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Okay, so these are the main factors in cultivation that distinguish quality levels. Exposure to outdoor elements, wind, dust, temperature, and humidity swings. I had one plant out on my porch that I just was trying to get some pollen off of, and so I put it out there, and it got so dirty just having the wind blow past it. When I crushed some rosin off of it, it was brown, in comparison to the nice beige rosin that I got off of my indoor plants. And so I was like, I never want to grow another outdoor plant. It's so gross. But if you have a nice screen greenhouse, and Scott's going to explain all that kind of stuff to you, you can do sort of like a hybrid between an indoor and outdoor grow where you get a lot of the benefits of the protections of indoor without the cost of indoor. So that's what he's going to be talking about. The other major factor is the lack of soil and media management. I don't know how many times organic growers have told me, oh, pH manages itself, don't worry. I've grown a lot of organic, and I've grown a lot of cocoa and a lot of rockwool and every media you can imagine. And if you have a fertilizer regimen or any other influence in the soil that causes the pH to move out of range, either on the high side or the low side, you're going to lose a lot of yield. You need to be keeping track of your pH. They make probes, like Blue Lab makes a LEAP probe now that you can stick in the soil. They're fairly delicate, so you have to put like another probe in there, another like a poker first, and make sure the soil's moist and stick it in there. That's really important. And you want to see the trends. Is the pH trending up after I apply water and fertilizer or down? Usually it goes down. Depends on what your source water is. But if it's not a regimen that maintains you in the range of like 5.7 to 6.3 pH, you are not going to get the yield that you want to get, and you're not going to get the quality you want to get, because the pH range is what allows the essential minerals to be available to the plant when it needs it. It needs to be the right minerals that are available as well, but if they're not in the right pH range, then the plant can't get them the way they want. So that to me is the number one most critical thing that growers need to take care of. And that means if you're a hemp grower in the ground or raised beds outdoors, indoors, rock wool, anything, you got to be tracking that and keeping it in range. It's a whole other talk that I could do, for an hour on all the factors that cause it to go in and out of range and what you can do to counterbalance that, but it is super important. So then the mineral balance is the next thing. There are certain minerals that the plant will take a lot of up even when it doesn't need it, and then it'll be at the detriment of the yield of the plant and the quality of the plant. I've got a slide on that coming up. And then oxygen is the other sort of unsung hero of plant yield, where you'll see in indoor environments these oxygenation supplementation systems, like Advanced Treatment Technologies makes one, Biotherm makes this thing called the Tube, T-O-O-B. I can't remember, there's a French company, starts with an M, they make a kind of nanobubble thing. You get huge yield increases when the water that you're using for the plants is saturated with extra oxygen. You can also kind of get some of these effects when you use loose soil, like a good amount of aeration in the soil and water kind of lightly on a regular basis. So that way there's this medium range wet dry thing going on all the time. The soil stays supple and it dries back to, like, let's say 40% moisture, and then it gets watered up to like 60% moisture and then sort of stays in that range. You'll get as good of an effect as you can without oxygen supplementation that way. But if you go to the facilities that have the full-on oxygen dosers, they got huge roots just booming out of the bottoms of the plants, and that makes a big difference in the outcome on yields and quality. So keep that in mind if you're in an outdoor raised bed or ground growing situation, to put a lot more aeration, whether it be rice hulls or perlite or bigger chips of whatever your media is, like cocoa fiber. There are companies now that make bigger chips. You just want to make sure that it's loose. The water is not sitting on the surface for a while before it sinks in. It really just has to nicely sink right in. And you don't do big giant waterings at once and then wait for a dry down. You do little bits at a time, like once a day, or if you can even do more than once a day, little bits, and then you get the benefit of that oxygen in the root zone. And then the proper curing techniques is the other thing that gets a lot of growers, where it's like, well, I just grew a great plant and it smelled great, but then I harvested and I hung it up and now it smells like hay a week or two later. And then you've lost all of the benefit that you're putting all that energy into because you didn't have the right environmental conditions for drying your plants, which essentially is 65 to 70 degrees. Once you go over like 72, you're kind of cooking your terpenes. You want your plants to be in a area that's clean air, that's well circulated, but not like a big open space where there's a lot of oxygen, because terpenes oxidize. So kind of like packed in a space with clean circulating air is what gets you the best outcome. So I'm not a big fan of the burping technique. I think that lets more oxygen in. I think what I would do is dry it the way I just explained, and then use a nitrogen storage system, they're available. Like Amerivac is a company that sells a nitrogen storage system, and then there's another one called Nuco that packages into these little tuna can type things with the nitrogen infusion. And so oxygen really is your enemy when it comes to preserving terpenes. So those are sort of the overview items that make a big difference. And then more specifically, if you're doing leaf tissue testing, which I personally could not live without, there's a company in Oregon called A&L Labs that does it, and there's another one called, I want to say, Meristem. Anyway, there are a few companies here that you can call and say, will you test cannabis leaves for me? I want to get a tissue analysis. And they'll take them, and they'll come back with numbers around this. They'll give you all 13 minerals, but I wanted to put the ones in here that are critical, that I see as being most common causes of problems when I look at leaf tissue tests. So a lot of people think that cannabis can handle a lot of calcium. In the vegetative state of growth, it actually can handle a lot of calcium, but as soon as you start switching over to flower, that same amount of calcium that was pretty happy at 3 or 4% is going to start going up to 6%, 7%, 8%. I've seen it over 10%. And most cultivars do not like that. They will slow down. And it's kind of an insidious type of way that it gets in the way of your harvest. It's not like some other minerals. When they start to get too much, you can really tell. The plant really shows it in some overt way. But when calcium gets high, the plant just kind of slows down and doesn't flower all the way. So you're not immediately knowing by looking at it that something's wrong. You're just seeing at the end that it's not as big as you wish it were. So that one you should really keep an eye on and try to pull it down. The high chloride, that's another one. I really learned that from working with cocoa growers, because raw cocoa fiber comes with a lot of chloride in it. And what turns out to be the case, and this I learned through leaf sap testing, which is way more esoteric than leaf tissue testing, but it shows some things that you don't see in leaf tissue testing. The main one being that cannabis has basically a suicidal affinity for chloride, and there's a ton of it in cocoa fiber, and there's a lot of it in water sometimes too. You don't want more than like 4 parts per million in each fertigation dose of chloride. If you're up in the 10 plus range, then you've got so much chloride in your plant that it can't take up as much phosphate and sulfate and nitrate and other things that it needs. It really hardly needs any chloride. It is considered an essential nutrient, but you could get away with 1 part per million. And for that matter, all of the standard agricultural salts like potassium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, they have chloride in them as a contaminant. So even if you took all the chloride completely out of your media and you didn't have ammonium chloride or anything like that in your recipe, you're still going to have plenty of chloride in your plants because it's in there as a unintended ingredient. So pH not staying stable, that was another one I said. People often have too much nitrogen in flower. This is especially in soil where I see that. If it's greater than 4.5%, you're looking for something closer to 3.5% to 4% in flowering plants. And actually, just to give you the corollary to that, in veg you want something more like 5.5% for nitrogen in your leaf tissue analysis. In flower, once you're pushing much over 4%, you're going to see leafy buds. Your buds are not going to be solid buds, they're going to be leafy buds. So make sure that you don't let your nitrogen get too high in flower. And then the other one that's super common, sometimes this is because of well water, and sometimes it's because you're using a commercial formula that's not for cannabis. You'll get really high manganese in your flower. And anything above about 300 parts per million will start to put a dent in your yields. I've seen it in just about every commercial formula that I've analyzed, like the hobby type stuff that you buy at the hydro stores has usually 4 to 6 times more manganese in it than what cannabis wants. So those are the ones to really watch out for. Branding, I gotta say, I don't know a lot about it, but what I do know from just observing dispensaries, because I always go visit dispensaries when I'm on trips, is that this is a way where if you got a harvest that isn't that great, people are still gonna buy it if you have an awesome brand, because they're just used to that brand. They like the look and feel of it. They feel familiar, and there are companies that I'm sure you've seen them that are branding experts that actually don't know anything about cannabis that have come in and succeeded in the cannabis industry because they've got these great packaging ideas, or they're working with a famous person like Marley Naturals or something like that. And so if you want to start doing this smokable hemp thing, you got to find a brand, make a story, and look out there to see what's there and mimic it. So I got a couple examples. Humboldt Seed Company, I really like their natural cardboard kind of approach that they do, because I'm a little bit of a hippie myself. And so they've got it going on with the branding. This is one of my clients in Las Vegas, Green Therapeutics. They're pre-rolls. And in Vegas, everything is more golden and more high-end looking, to try to serve the gambling crowd. But yeah, getting that concept together so that people can tell just from looking across the room that it's interesting to them. If, for example, they're not allowed to smell it or smoke it before they buy it. Like in Vegas, a lot of times you can't even smell something before you buy it, which means I'm not buying it. But these are the kinds of things that happen in the market. And so therefore you have to have a physical presentation if you want to do smokable flower, just in case people can't just take a chunk of the flower and smell it and want it just for that reason. So my timing looks excellent. This is just my closer to remind you of who I am and what I do. The cards again are up here, and I'm happy to chat with anybody afterwards. And I'm going to dovetail into Scott's talk by saying that the way he's doing greenhouses, first off, has a ton of experience behind it, and there's no substitute for that. Also, if considering that the market is tending towards pressuring the price and that prices are going to be lower and lower because there's so many people in this industry, you have to get your cost, your capital expenses and your operating expenses down as low as possible. Now, I work on sort of the flip side of that. I go into operations and I'm like, you've already spent this money and you've already got this situation. I'm going to get you more for what you've spent. I'm going to get you higher yields and better plants. But he's the one that is on the beginning of the supply chain and says, I'm going to help you set up for as low of a cost as possible to get the effective conditions that you need. And so with that, I will hand it over to Scott and he can educate all of us on that.
Segue from one to the other. Well, thank you very much, Nick. To start the ball rolling, let's see, I need to get this presentation off. Oh, there we're going to start with suspended brands. I'm not going to start quite yet, but right there. Okay, I'll pause it for now. What I'm going to start with is we're going to start with a video. Just to give you an idea what can be done with greenhouses for production of cannabis. Now, whether the cannabis is going to be a hemp plant or whether you're dealing with THC or CBD production, the plant's the plant. It has it's the same life expectancy, the same annual. Production times are about the same, especially if we're talking about blooming a plant for a smoking flower, a flower that is ready to be smoked. Let me get this back. Okay. Let's see if I can get this to start over. There we go. All right, bear with me. Shucks. Sorry, folks. Not my computer. There we go. So this will take about 7 minutes.
Economics. I spend in the summer $5,000 a month in utility bills. Same size grow in an indoor, I'm spending $100,000 a month in utilities.
These plants are maturing at a faster rate than I've ever had plants mature before. The quality, aromas, size were actually far superior than indoor.
Honestly, I would see what people are doing in greenhouses. It's pretty amazing what people are pulling off.
Talking to some of the greenhouse manufacturers at different trade shows, I think kind of solidified that it really is possible to do greenhouse growing in this area where a lot of people didn't think it was. My name is Fadi Yashrudi. I'm one of the owners of Suspended Brands here in the Pacific Northwest. So the concept of Suspended Brands was probably Jeff's.
My name is Jeff Way. My brother and I and two of our lifelong friends decided back here about 4 years ago when Washington was legalizing marijuana that we would take a gamble and invest in the industry.
First business model that we had was really geared towards indoor growing.
We were going to do most of our production indoor in sealed environment.
That lease actually fell through, and we started looking at different properties that we could acquire.
So when that went south, we were scrambling. We found the nursery.
I think it was at that point that we really started investigating greenhouse growing versus indoor growing, and so we kind of changed that model.
That was the point when we saw the light deprivation, the fact that we could do 5 crops a year in a greenhouse. If we do this right, We're talking about a facility we can grow in year round.
It was then that we started looking into it and really started seeing that it really may be a possibility. There were a lot of critics against greenhouse growing. There was very few advocates of greenhouse growing. So we started doing our own research.
I grew in the medical facility that I didn't see a bug or a disease for 4 years. Not one bug. I introduced some clones into that room. The disease spread like wildfire. I could not control it. And that was kind of a turning point for me on an industrial scale. If I'm gonna do this and I can't control what's coming into these controlled rooms, then I'm not gonna be able to control it once it's there. From designing rooms that were small cubicle style indoor grows to a 12,000 square foot flower house that's on a perpetual cycle instead of doing small cubicles in a harvested rotation. So it doesn't give you the ability to stop that grow, clean that room, and then restart. Now we're on something that's perpetual, and it's something you've got to consistently manage that. So that was a huge fear, because on an indoor, if I see something that I can't manage, I'm just gonna shut it down. Where on this, you can't shut it down. Perpetual harvest in a greenhouse is by far the best way, the only way that I would ever look at doing it. In the summer, we're seeing on average about a week and a half quicker, where a sativa that would take us 11 is down to maybe 9.5, 10. And an indica that would be a 8, we're cropping before 7. And trichomes are cloudy, everything's looking fine. We went poly. We wanted the head height in our grow, so we went 14 foot on it. We thought we were actually gonna give up a little bit on the quality side. We thought we would be close to it, but we did think we were gonna be compromising a little bit of quality. Now looking back on it, I don't think we've given up any quality.
We were really interested to see how was greenhouse growing going to compare to indoor growing.
It was a huge issue. Every square foot in that greenhouse is very valuable. And so when we can go from 55, 60% coverage on a greenhouse without rolling benches up to 83, 84, 85% with benches, it's a no-brainer. The math's running right. We should be hitting our 15 pounds a day.
I was concerned about issues such as humidity control. If I were to get pests or mildew, how easy would it be to remove that from the greenhouse without having to extract every single plant from the greenhouse, and keep things clean. My name is Brad Dirth. I am the grow house manager, operations manager here at Bender Brands Receptive Group. I also helped build the greenhouse here. I was what they would call a guerrilla grower for about 25 years. Since the very early 1990s. I've grown on mountaintops, in fields, in basements, in attics, in bedrooms, you name it. I've grown in everything, although this is my first greenhouse. Industrialize the process and still have a boutique style product. Trying to find that happy medium is the real trick. The greenhouse that we have has wonderful airflow. It's got gas heat. It's a very dry heat, and that helps us control our humidity in the wintertime. The blackout system is marvelous. Even in the middle of summer up here, we have days that the sun comes up at 4:45 in the morning, doesn't set till 10:15 at night. Straight down the way here, you can see our intake vents, which have blackout louvers in them. Up above, we also have horizontal airflow fans, and they're positioned strategically to create a nice airflow across the whole room without blowing the plants around too much. I've had no issues. This is the best growing environment that I've grown in. So when we first started talking about it, I had concerns, pest pressure, humidity, temperatures, moisture, all these different things that come with greenhouses. It really pushed us to take a close look at it and really determine what our benefits were, what the pros were, what the cons were in doing that. Economical savings, plant resiliency, being a greener company, those were all things that we wanted to show in our brand. The worries didn't subside until we started noticing that the plants were growing faster, our flower times were shorter, Our carbon footprint is probably a fraction of what other growers are doing. The automation that we have in place today in these greenhouses really does allow us to reduce the human error. It also reduces man hours. With the automation, you kind of set it and forget it. We're currently in our flower house, which is 90 by 132 feet, which gives us roughly 12,000 square feet. The way that the property is situated allowed us to do an east to west layout where the sidewall is facing the south because it actually gives us more sunlight with minimal shading. So the challenges that we have now are really some of the same concerns that we had, but they're much smaller concerns for us. Are we ever going to get rid of those issues? No, and I don't think that anybody's claiming that you will. So it really is a matter of using the resources that you have, the tools that you have to be able to maintain those issues. It wasn't only until a couple months ago that I really bought into the fact that we made the right decision and we were doing the right thing.
Gives you an idea of what can be done in a greenhouse. I'm going to start this over. We did a test on it before we started the show, obviously, and I need to bring it back to its original slideshow. And beginning. Here we go. At any rate, as I was introduce myself. My name is Scott Seaton, Greenhouse Specialist. I've been a supplier for greenhouses for over 30 years. Basically what it boils down to is as we were getting into the market, we realized as the cannabis market was being developed in Oregon in particular, we had a lot of customers who are indoor growers who came out of the industry and decided to consider doing greenhouse growing. You saw one example that was Suspended Brands up in Washington State. The yields have been fabulous for them, as well as the quality. A greenhouse environment, of course, will allow for a lot of solar radiation around the plant, where the plant can take in as much nutrient and process as photosynthesis as best as possible when leaf temperatures from top to bottom are pretty much equivalent with a good diffusing type plastic roofing that is typically used in these type of greenhouses nowadays. But in many cases, I have growers who will move with this particular style of greenhouse and just use it for their propagation of seedlings and such like that. You see in this case it's geraniums, but earlier you saw a photo with that video slide coming off of the fields. That particular farm is out in Malala area, and the grower is using it for where production. Here, let's see if I can pause this. Yeah, I guess I just pause it here. I'm not used to your equipment. There we go. Any rate, our buildings can be used in multiple ways. As like I said, it's the propagation or say seed production or say for blooming flowers for cannabis. The grower that I was mentioning before had bought a building. Initially it was for his propagation of his seedlings. He decided to go and harden his crop inside pots and then get them out to the fields. Afterwards he realized that it was kind of a waste. He should be doing something like smokable hemp. So now he's doing production inside the greenhouse that is smokable hemp. This is showing how our automated blackout systems operate. Basically, it's a drive system, and this would be used for if you end up needing to supplement light. We found that more and more often, especially in the cannabis industry, since it's considered a commercial crop, or a commercial greenhouse, or a commercial building by the building department, that they have requirements such to prevent light pollution into the community. And because of that, we found that blackout systems will allow you to close off the early morning and late evening requirements when you want to extend your day length and you're growing during the winter months, early spring and late fall. To reduce it down to, say, a 12-hour grow period, which helps induce the blooming cycles on plants. Anyway, And we are able to get that accomplished by using the blackout system. See how, there we go. This gives you an idea of what a building can look like in the early dawn hours when the grow lights are on. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen with hemp, but it's highly likely. Okay, right now I'm dealing with a customer in the Banks area out in Washington County that's having to deal with that on a very large grow that he wants to use for seed production. And the point is that he's trying to get at least 3 crops a year. Now, because he's going to have to put in a blackout, we're now considering, well, heck, we're going to 5. Because really, you should be able to get 9 weeks, a cycle for your plants within 9 weeks versus, say, 12 weeks if it were outdoors, or 11 weeks, you know, in a typical grow operation. But at any rate, the systems, really, the way they work is like we offer smaller buildings, entry-level buildings for greenhouses. They're on average, without any of the buzzers and bells like this, you're figuring about $450 a square foot for the building as an investment. Plus it's labor to install, another, say, $3 or $4 a square foot, $8 to $8.50 a square foot constructed for, say, maybe a 4,000, 3,000 square foot greenhouse. Now, if you start getting into these automated systems, you know, you're going to add a lot of money onto it. However, what's your return with the crop? Are you able, if you're able to go from like 2 at the best outdoor crops a year to 5 a year? Hey, if you got $7 a gram, not saying this is what you're going to take, unless of course you run also the dispensary for it. How many grams is in an ounce? There's 32 grams in an ounce. 32, you know, that's a lot of money. It's $270? $217 an ounce. How many pounds can you get for plant? About 1.5 pounds on average. Inside a grow, it can be upwards of 2. I know many growers are getting that. Now think of the money that can be made here. That's why greenhouse grow is really something to consider. Let's see if I get this thing to run. This shows you the blackout system in operation again. Now, if it were a single bay, we have a system that is actually designed for a smaller single, you know, entry-level greenhouse. And those buildings, they're on average, with all the buzzers and bells, which would include, say, the blackout system, why is it doing that? There we go. Anyway, the blackout system, it'd have an evaporative cool cell wall so that you can operate to cool the building in the hottest days of summer, automated ridge vents, automated roll-up sidewalls. It would have a computer control environmental system, so it oversees all the steps of the growing process. It'd be set up for lights, but without the lights, you're figuring about $25 a square foot. So say a 30 by 96, you're looking at about $54,000, $53,000 for that unit. The construction on it is probably going to run somewhere at another $10 to $15 a square foot, depending on what you're needing to do. Now, if you get into, say, rolling bench systems and things of that nature, which we showed on the video, that's a whole nother can of worms. You're going to be investing another, well, on average, just rolling benches, probably around $6 to $7 a square foot. If they're ebb and flow trays for collecting your nutrient solution and then recycling it after, and either whether or not you're draining it off to waste or whether or not you're recycling and change your EC and pH and re-injecting it, then you're going to be looking at about $10 to $11 a square foot for that type of system, over and above the cost of the greenhouse. There are so many ways of venting these buildings. In particular, the most popular that seems to be a trend that's moving forward right now is this. Here, I'm going to stop this one. Pause. I think that's pause. At any rate, what we have is any of the intake airs comes in through, say, an in wall of a building. We will put a screen, in this case, a 150 micron screen in front of that wall, so that any air going into the building is filtered, no vector issues coming in, and most pollen will not go through this as well. Most, not all, but a fair amount. And then that in wall would also, the internal in wall would be the intake wall of the greenhouse would also have, say, ways of keeping the cold out. This type of system right here shows a guillotine vent that lowers when the exhaust fans turn on during the summer months and then closes again when the system is turned off. Now, the only time you really need to use exhaust fans inside a greenhouse for cannabis, if you have passive cooling, which is using ridge vents and using, say, sidewall venting, is when the temperatures are just too high outdoors, or when you've got your blackout system operating in summer months in the late afternoon and it's 105 outside and you want to close your fabric so that you can turn your grow lights on. It's going to bring up the heat inside the building considerably. So the turn on those exhaust fans will allow the air to pull through the building and cool it off. We usually will stage that with the evap walls where they'll be operating such as to open the vents, allow the air to move through. The next stage would be further cooling the building by causing the water system, the water walls to actually activate where it'll have the evaporative effect to cool the crops, air. Anyway, that brings us to another thing that has been an issue in the past 4 or 5 years we've ran into. And that would be that when you start moving a lot of moist air through a greenhouse, you can have issues with, fungal growth, or there's bacterial issues, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to prevent some of those problems from arising, we recommend putting an HAF, a horizontal airflow fan, to move air around the crop to keep it constantly moving, prevents the sporulation to settle on some of the plants, as well as, in addition, using dehumidification units like Quest and so on and so forth in a greenhouse. So that way you get the benefit of like indoor growing, where you have an HVAC system, so to speak, on your in a true indoor environment where you're using warehouse growing, you use HVAC to adjust your air and so on and so forth. You get that benefit, plus also for the matter, you get natural sun exposure to the crop and less power used because you're not using grow lights 12 hours a day. You're using the sun as much as you can. The computer control systems that we have also offer the ability to monitor with your, say, smartphone, or make changes with the smartphone. Also to operate the grow lights in stages where it imitate morning and afternoon light. It'll start up slow and go to full frequency for approximately a couple hours, and then in the same way close out the evening in the same fashion during the winter months when you want to extend your day length here in the Northwest. Hawaii, you don't need to do this. You almost got 12 hours of light year round, at any rate. But that being said, these things are going to help your crop come to maturity in a quicker fashion. It helps the plant to be able to take in the nutrients more effectively through the photosynthesis, using truly natural light as much as possible, supplementing only when it's needed. Also, we can rotate the power grid for the grow lights where they're checkerboard. Like we'll assign, say, in a grow area 30 by 96, you might want to do a 8 by 8 foot grid for grow lights for blooming plants. And during the stage of afternoons like yesterday, where it was, where's the sun? Okay, well, you can turn on lights A, which is half of the lights. They're equally distributed among light B, which are the other half of the lights, and segment them from one section to another, constantly rotating, keeping your power use down to 50%, yet still getting the proper saturation to come close to mimicking what the plant might need during, a regular sunny or partially cloudy day versus a full rainy day. So these things are all now part of the packages are involved in, now available in greenhouse growing. And really, they're pretty old systems. They've been around for many, many years, for the mums industry, for poinsettias, for orchid growing, so on and so forth. The trick is is whether or not the hemp industry, since it's considered nationally as an agricultural crop now, will they allow us to continue with little policies like EFU land allowing for no engineering stamps on greenhouses, whether or not they're going to be truly considered greenhouses when you start to get to this level of automation, or whether or not they're going to stick us and say, well, no, I'm sorry, now it's a commercial building, and therefore you have to meet all of these requirements like blackout systems when you operate your grow lights and so on and so forth. If, however, that happens, where the grow lights have to be sheltered for light pollution, then it is really it's actually a very good idea to get the, I'm sorry, I just realized my time ran out, didn't it? Sorry, I could go on, but no, I'll conclude. The whole point is let's, if you want to really take a look at what it takes to get a grow operation at this level of sophistication with using greenhouses, please contact me. I'll give you my card at the end of this presentation. And we know for a fact that we've got many a grower that, for instance, I got a 10,000 square foot grow down in Lowell that produces 2,600 plants inside rolling benches. You can't do that inside an acre of plants. Is what, 2,000? Something to consider. At any rate, let me conclude. You folks have a very nice day, and thank you for your time.